Welcome to the World Football Summit podcast, the show for football industry leaders who want to stay ahead of the game. We bring you the latest insights, trends, and stories from the experts driving innovation and progress in sports business worldwide. Join us as we dive deep into the ideas and initiatives transforming the world of football. From sustainability and innovation to player development, fan engagement, and everything in between. Our goal is to unite the global football industry and drive positive change and progress. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the World Football Summit podcast. I'm your host, Jaime, Director of Content and Communications at World Football Summit. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Michael Broughton back to the show. With so many things going on in the sports investment landscape, I wanted to have him back for a deep dive into the trends and dynamics in the space. This is what we talk about. And we also discuss the evolution of the media rights market and how this will impact that investment landscape. We talked about adopting a fan-centric approach, technology. As it's always the case with Michael, these conversations are way too much fun. Before we kick off though, a quick reminder. Don't forget to subscribe and read the podcast on your platform of choice. Share it with your colleagues in the industry as well. And if you want to stay ahead of the curve, subscribe to our newsletter. That's where we share every update about our events, about trends, everything that we see that's going on. Anyway, you'll find the link in the show notes. Remember, we just celebrated World Football Summit Europe in Sevilla. And now we're focusing on World Football Summit Asia, taking place on December 2nd and 3rd in Riyadh. Check it all out on our website. And now, nothing else from my side. Let's welcome Michael Broughton to the show. Well, Michael, this has been a long time coming. We had a conversation way too long ago, but it's finally a pleasure to welcome you back to the World Football Summit podcast. What you been up to?
Oh God, what have I been up to? Too much and too little at the same time, I think. Keeping busy, fascinated by what's going on in our industry. It's changing faster and faster. So, it's exciting to be back speaking to you, excited to be back at more WFS events. But yeah, the sports world just keeps changing, doesn't it?
Too much. That's the only constant, if you think about it. Just change. Anyway, Michael, I think I want to start with an investment in sports history class, because there's so much going on. But I guess you've been involved in the space for a while, and this is why I wanted to bring you on, just to talk a bunch of things, but especially that, So how have you seen the investment in sports landscape evolve over the years? Let's start with that.
Yeah, it's funny because 15 years ago, I sat down with my father and I pitched him starting Europe's first ever sports-focused investment vehicle. And I call it a vehicle because, it was 2009 I pitched him, 2010 we launched. And only later did I learn the language around this. So we were effectively what you call a fundless sponsor. But no one was investing, particularly in Europe, in sport as an investment class. It just didn't happen. It's one of the few reasons why my father said yes to it was we did our research and we couldn't find anyone who, particularly being London-based, we view Europe as the opportunity, not the US. And I think the likes of Rain had emerged in the US, but very early days. So Europe was just kind of green pasture. And it was still very much seen by investors as a hobby for a wealthy individual. And, I was a Chelsea fan. So, that was a true case, right? We had a Russian billionaire spending money. We were loving life. So, you kind of, that was pretty much what you saw sport as. And I'd been a headhunter with Nolan Partners. And what I'd seen was not enough people could afford our services in 2008, 9, 10, because it wasn't enough capital to invest in good people. So I often recount a story. Some clients would sit there and say to us, we want to hire a commercial director who can walk into the CMO of Coca-Cola in Atlanta and we can afford to pay him 70, 80,000. The response was, well, you could either get a guy who can go into CMO in Atlanta or you can pay him 70, 80 grand. Try to find the two in one, virtually impossible. And I just felt that if you could put capital on the balance sheet and bring expertise, you could I'll just invest in the structures, but get good people. You get a virtuous cycle. No one was doing it. We started deploying money. Again, as a funder sponsor, you raise money at the same time as you're finding the deals. It's quite complicated. It takes a lot longer than you'd like. You miss out on a number of deals you'd like to do. And then over a number of years, what you saw happen was the rise of venture in sports, right? So Sapphire Sports started to emerge. Courtside, one of my personal favorites, emerged. Go for it with Mark Lemon emerged. And very much, in my view, that first phase, I like to think actually the first 3 or 4 years, we were probably the only ones doing it. And after that, say 2014 on, you started to see the rise of venture capital. 2019, you started to see a bit of a shift, and particularly exaggerated in 2020. So 2019, I think Arctos was created. Passive LP capital. Bruin emerged about 2015, I think. Again, that was active private equity capital looking at more established businesses. George has done a brilliant job. So, 15 to 19, start to see the emergence of professional, institutional private equity capital. You kind of saw also more recently in 2020, the shift from venture to growth. So there's a lot fewer people doing venture. In my mind right now, there's a lot more going, no, we'll wait till Series B, Series C, and then jump on it. I still firmly believe there's a space for sports venture, but often the products at the venture stage are so narrow and so niche, you can't really see how they deploy in terms of how you get scale. But institutional capital really, I think, started to come in late teens. The rise of Arctos, very much an American style, passive investment thesis. CVC have always been around, but sport was never really, until more very recently, a core functionality. Formula One is a brilliant deal for them economically. So you've seen this now, more recently, the world has changed now. So you're now starting to see things like structured finance, structured credit. You think of the rise of Ares and Oaktree and others into sport, providing very sophisticated capital to the industry. What I would say is this is a cycle that you've seen happen to most industries. This isn't, history tells us these things are rarely completely unique. So many industries have seen something similar, right? Where at the first, it's wealthy families and individuals. Then it becomes people coming in and going, let's provide some venture and see what goes. Then you start to see more structured institutional capital, like private equity and growth funds. And then later on, you see the credit providers coming in and going, oh, this is an established business that can generate cash and future revenues. We can securitize that. It's just a rise in sophistication. It doesn't mean that family offices and the more equity-focused entities vanish. They still stay very interested in sports. I think you've also seen family offices become far more sophisticated just over time. Again, not just pertaining to sport, just generically speaking. So, it's not unexpected that once certain, thresholds in terms of revenue started to being hit, that people looked at sport and went, hang on a minute, maybe this isn't a hobby. What I would say is that American investors are still far more in tune with the opportunity around sports than, say, European investors. And at institutional level, there's a lot more box ticking to protect the investors in the funds. There's a lot more box ticking of does it meet these criteria? Whereas again, a family office or a venture fund could be a bit more, open-minded about what they're trying to achieve and how aggressive they want to be. If there is a downside, and this feels like a very long monologue right now, so please do interrupt soon. On the downside, what I'd say is I haven't necessarily seen on the other side of the table a massive increase in sophistication on the sports side in terms of negotiating the deals with the investors. I often say to early stage companies that are, call me up and say, hey, can you help with money? There's a brilliant book called The Secrets of Sand Hill Road, where a lot of it's a a current partner, I think, of Andreessen Horowitz. And he tells you what they're looking for and how they think and how they structure their deals and what are the differences in the types of capital, what are the governance rules they're going to look for, what are some of the tricks of the trade where they'll protect you. You might think that you're protected, but you're not. And so I often say to people who look like they've got an interesting business, look, go read that, because if you don't retain an advisor, you really need to know what the other side is thinking. But then my other recommendation is hire a professional advisor, not just an accountant, not just a lawyer, a professional advisor who understands the space, because you can get starry-eyed about someone's looking to invest in you and miss some of the minutiae in the contract that might actually be your downfall or your blessing.
So, in a nutshell, what I'm getting from you, Michael, is on one hand, you see that the sport business model, which we talked about last time, is becoming outdated because before it was pretty straightforward. You had your commercial, you had your broadcasting, and you had your match day. Now we see dynamics that's changing. So that is effectively bringing in more investors, institutional investors into the game. On the other side, you don't see the sports industry evolving or becoming more professional in a way that it's able to keep up with these complex operations that we're seeing. Is that kind of like a good summary?
Well, I'd say the financing models have become massively updated over the last 10 years. I don't think the commercial model in sports has changed much. I would argue that whilst we've gotten better at it, and often I speak to headhunters and their commentary is that we're hiring better people, not different people. So the model isn't necessarily changing, but the numbers are big enough now that different types of investors see an opportunity in that. And if they can see that there's long-term value, then they can securitize rather than just provide equity. So that there's a very different thinking, I think, from investors as to how they view the world and how they view sports. I think the sports model is still largely the same as it was. I would say this, I think we're much better at what we used to do than we used to be even 10 years ago. So I think that, the sports industry has made massive strides. I just think it's still got a ton of yardage in front of it. We do have better people. We do have more interesting, often owners who are a bit more, if you take the NBA, the ownership group is quite advanced. I mean, they're mostly tech-based. So I think the commercial model needs to change. I think some of the things that I find slightly interesting about what's happened is not all sports throw off cash. And what you've seen a lot of investors typically look for is, return on cash. So, if you invest, I was explaining this to somebody actually at the Chelsea football match at the weekend, tell how badly we were doing at the time that we were talking about how you finance something with a fan. And I was explaining a bit like how you mortgage a house. You might put 20% equity down and you borrow 80%. But if you're repaying it over time, you should be fine. If you do it buy to let, what you're looking to do is you're taking the money that the person who's renting the house from pay off the mortgage so that free cash flow from them means that whilst you only use, say, 10, 20% of the money to buy it, at the end of the day, you own 100% of the equity. So, we're just talking with a lot more zeros typically when it comes to financing. But to be honest, that's really financial engineering. You borrow cash, you use the cash flow to pay off the debt, and at the end, the investor who's put hopefully very little at risk ends up with all the equity and walks away with a lot of money, but more sophisticated than that. But that's basically the other bit. I think one of the challenges I see is when you meet the people at these finance companies, you have to realize just how smart they are. They are MBAs, PhDs. They are, genuinely, first class Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard kind of people. And they are looking for an angle. They're looking for a way to maximize the return for their business. And why shouldn't they? I have no issue with that. When you look at the majority of finance directors in most sports organizations, they have tended in history to be management accountants or cash accountants, right? How do I keep an eye on basically my cash flow to make sure this business works? Then you come up against PhDs figuring out things that you've never contemplated. It's a mismatch. Um, I compared again at the weekend. Will Hughes was trying to mark Noni Madueke. Well, one is lightning fast and one was slow as a snail. It's a mismatch. It's not that Will Hughes isn't very good at what he does, right? It's just that Noni has a different skill set and is able to go past it. And so I think, where you've often seen sports teams or organizations get better is you have to build a new stadium. You get in the CFO who could do that. It's very complicated. So you tend to hire up. I think our commercial model has a long way to go. I think it's going to be potentially forced there by some of the deals that have happened from a financial perspective, commercial perspective. And again, I would go back to my single biggest piece of advice to people in the sports industry is make sure that you retain really good advisors. And there's a number out there that are brilliant who work in sports who can really help you navigate these waters. I don't subscribe to things like the phrase vampire funds or, zombie trusts. I always think that's bad. I think finance can be enormously powerful to help our industry. I mean, I would say that I've been working with finance and sport for 14 years. So obviously I'm a believer in it. But sometimes you can enter into an inappropriate transaction.
And I'm thinking, to your point, a lot of these football clubs around the world have a lot of pressure to deliver financial results. And that's usually short-term pressure. Now, is this mismatch in talent and complexity driving kind of like, was it putting pressure on financial managers at football clubs to kind of like accept those investments versus trying to evolve the business model? Because that play is much more longer term, while as receiving an investment is more, it's short-term cash at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest problem for sport is often the biggest pressure is on-field performance. So your challenge becomes, where do you put your capital? So let's say you raise capital, where do you put it? A lot of it goes on in say, football, transfers and wages. I like an element of the CBC La Liga deal because it required it to be on infrastructure and technology. Well, that to me was a sensible concept because it's like, look, this can't just be to fix today's balance sheet. This needs to fix our future. If you're going to do a long-term deal, you need to be thinking like that. So I think from a strategic perspective, now not all clubs would have done it the right way, but that's life. I mean, we all make mistakes, we all make good ideas, but at least the concept there was that, look, all of our stadiums need upgrading, all of our technology and fan engagement needs updating. A certain percentage of your capital must be focused in that area. I think that's a very smart way of looking at it. All too often, you see the securitization of a future income to paper over today's cracks. And that genuinely scares me because, if you sell the future to fix today, but you don't fix tomorrow, what have you got to sell in the future to cover the cracks that you haven't yet fixed? Right. So, if you take the money, but you don't build a new stadium or you don't develop a way to engage with your fans, you don't build a proper loyalty program, whatever it may be, then 10 years down the line, when you need to refinance, but you've already sold your future, that's a scary point. I think raising finance and not looking at your commercial model right now in sports would be, a bit senseless in my mind.
So actually, that's what I wanted to ask you, because the way I see, you mentioned structured credit at the beginning, right? And within the context of sport, at the end of the day, it's just what you were mentioning. It's kind of like, I'm going to solve a short-term pain to give up my long-term revenues. So now that you're seeing so much of structured credit deals going on in the industry, isn't that a risk for a sports property on the long term?
Yes and no. It depends on how you want to use the finance, right? So I think there is a certain club, in Spain that makes me very nervous. I don't want to be rude about them because I'm a fan, but it makes me very nervous because I think you could argue they sold the family silver to pay for today. And if today doesn't work, they're in real trouble and they're highly leveraged. And I think that could be a problem. I think they're balancing on a knife edge. Having said that, I go back to my example of a mortgage. There's nothing wrong with taking a mortgage to buy a house, right? Or if you own a house, to take out finance to develop the house, fix the roof, put an extension on it, all these kind of things, right? So to create value. So the trick is to make sure, if you take on money, what are you doing it for? What is your strategic rationale? What are you hoping to develop? Because particularly in European football, I think that's core to why you'd raise capital, which is your cash flows are constrained because your fan base demands you spend money on players. There's this weird dichotomy we have with fans where if you make a profit, you haven't spent enough. If you make a loss, you spend too much. And if you break even, you're probably bad in everybody's eyes, which makes no, but yeah, it's with fans, right? There's a reason why it's called fandom and so on. But I think I have no issue, and I quite like structured finance. Right? How is it developed? If you know what you have to pay and what your structure is, I know my mortgage payments. I meet them every month. When I can, I overpay. I've built a lot of value in my own personal bank by doing it. You can do the same in sports. You need to understand when you go into some of these deals that the other party might sit there saying, I don't think they can actually pay this. But if I end up owning the asset, which is a bit like a bank looking at my house, they should only offer me finance based on what I can afford to pay. But if they know my house is valuable, they may well lend me the money knowing I can't pay, and they'll take the house and then they can sell the house and make more money, right? But that's the risk that the money provider's taking, right? Which is they're quite happy with their 10 to 12% or whatever it may be, because that's what they've promised their investors. And if they hit that, they all get bonus, everyone's happy. If you fail, then they take the asset. I think one of the things I found funny from, if you think all the way back to Liverpool in 2009, 2010, or Barcelona more recently, I think the concept was always, well, the banks will never call in the loans because they'll never be able to sell a loan in our region again. And I don't think they understand that some of these finance partners are much more cutthroat than that. And I'm not saying that cutthroat is probably the wrong word. They have a duty to their investors. Yeah, they're being held accountable themselves, so why shouldn't you? I think the concept of, well, don't worry, the bank will never call in the loans and put us into bankruptcy. And as there are more and more zeros, more and more likely they call in the loan.
That's what I was going to say. That as you see the evolution, they're going to be more demanding, obviously, And obviously, without taking this as financial advice for anybody listening, and it's just at the beginning, there's so much going on. And one of the key pillars is the broadcasting revenue and how that is evolving, how that's plateauing. I want to understand, how does that impact the sport investment landscape, and where are we going with this? I mean, how is this going to evolve in the future?
Again, I think more people will need to realize how important the CFO is. If forecasting is critical, and a proper CFO, yeah, they've done that chartered accountancy, but they're far more broad-minded than many take them to be. I think you need ones who are also able to navigate the fact that what we discussed last time has broadly come true. We talked about broadcast rights plateauing in Europe. We talked about sponsorship deals becoming more complicated and more demanding on the sponsor side. We said match day stadiums, it's about yield management. All these things are ongoing. So how do you, as a rights holder, IP holder, broadcaster, navigate where the world is going? Because most broadcasters, are probably sat there trying to figure out what's the next 10 years look like, or what's the next 5 years look like. And we're going to see that world change, I think, at an increasing speed. Well, the challenges in anything like this is Excel will show you what you needed to show. I mean, it's a logic program, right? So I've once or twice been asked by a corporate financier, what did I want the result to be? No. plug the numbers in and let's see what the number shows up, and let's see if it's good or bad. And let's see if there are things we can intrinsically do to change that. But we need to know that we might need to hire people, we might need to do marketing in order to change the revenue number, which will therefore change our cost base. The CVC La Liga loan, and it is a loan, as I understand it, which is from a tax perspective better for everybody, again, how I understand it. I'd love to know what the model was, right? Because I would assume that the model called for 3% inflation plus 3 to 4% above that in terms of media rights going up in each cycle. So call it 7% each cycle, or 3% after inflation, whatever you want to call it. Will the next media rights deal in Spain go up that much? I don't know. Currently, I'd say that the market in Europe is suggesting it probably won't. What does that do to the model? Does that mean CVC look to exit it? And that doesn't mean that the deal collapses. It means that they might sell their piece of it to somebody else. It's a long-term transaction, and maybe the guys at CVC modeled that wrong. Maybe they got it absolutely right. Maybe they foresaw this in the way they, I don't know. I didn't see it. So I would have been advising them if they'd asked me, per our previous conversation, you should probably model, plug in there a few years or a few right cycles where it doesn't go up. It maybe stays still or goes down a couple of percentage points. How do we see competition mapping out in Europe in the next 5 to 10 years? Does big tech, which looks interested in sport in the US, look interested in so many different questions? I always remember, you've been around the industry long enough, you remember Perform was listed on the stock exchange and it was doing really well. It was really well. And I think it put out a quarterly set of results where it only grew 7% that quarter, not the 10% it predicted. And its valuation halved overnight. It was unbelievable. Like, it was still a growth platform. It was still growing nicely. It just missed its predictions by a couple of percentage points. And the point that in the end, they decided to go private again.
I mean, I think you would need to look into, that would be a fun exercise, no? To look into the different scenarios they're looking when planning these investments, if this, what happens if this happens, if that happens, and how they're adjusting their strategy,
And I guarantee this, that what CVC would have done on that deal. They would have done sensitivity analysis of the was it, right? What happens if it goes up? What happens if it goes down? How are we protected? How can we insure it? Is there insurance representatives? Like all sorts of things. Like, and it was a big deal, and they syndicated a whole bunch of it to others. So they took off a bunch of the risk from themselves to others. Very sophisticated thinking. I'm certain on the sports side, whilst there would have been a certain thinking of that, there would have been a conviction, our media rights will go up. And I say that with conviction because having spent enough time in the sports industry, it was a bit like housing. It will always go up. And as we learn with housing, it doesn't always go up. It can have a bumpy one. Now, that again goes to what's our commercial model look like going forward. That's a different question, but it will go into when you're financing these things. What's the model? Interestingly, and it may be a slight segue away from this, is what you've seen a lot of investors look at is, particularly with world football, is the potential power and reach and monetization opportunity of world. And so I think they're intrinsically, when they look at the numbers and they go, just how many people love sport, engage with it, and engage with it in very different ways than we used to, but still very active across all generations in how they engage with it. There is that bit like, I guess the 2010s of tech, where it was that kind of, what is your total addressable market? What's that actually look like? How can you get that? And that makes particularly the bigger brands in Europe very sexy for an investor from a perspective of, look at that untapped potential. My point would be, I don't think anyone's figured out how to tap into that potential.
But that's something I wanted to talk to you about, actually, because you mentioned at the beginning how for that development of the business strategy, fans need to be put into the center of the sports business model. And we also talked about this on the first episode that you were here with us. So how can football clubs do this? Because it's, those are nice words. Who's not going to say that? But how can you actually do that?
There is no one model, right? And unfortunately, at the moment, I think most sports all follow pretty much the same model. But there is no one model because a Manchester United is inherently different to a second division club in France. The product on the field is technically the same, but it's a different business. Last year, with yourselves and La Source, I was on a masterclass talking about what is your business model. And I asked everybody in the room what business model they were in, and they all raised their hands and they said they were all in content. And I said, no. Who here is a league? And one hand went up. I said, right, he's a content business. The rest of you are sponsorship and licensing businesses. And they looked at me. I said, well, what is it you actually sell? You sell tickets, you sell licensing, and you sell sponsorship. You create content to justify to your sponsors and licensing partners the numbers that you're requesting. And you should be creating content because that's the world we live in right now. But you are not a content business. I compared that to my local club where Hampton Richmond, and I said, look, we're effectively a pub. Ticket prices are pretty low. People come in, and the biggest thing the ownership did was, they've done a lot, but the most interesting for me was they made it a cashless environment in tier 6 of British football. A cashless environment, and they put in more bars with fast flow beer. And revenue just leapt because people have been spending all their time waiting to get a pint. And now they walk in, within 2 minutes, they've got their pint. We're a pub that puts on football matches. And it's a wonderful day out, and it's become a real family event, and they pretty much doubled the number of people coming because it's a pleasant experience. But it's a pub. It doesn't sell much sponsor. It doesn't sell any licensing. Its cost base is football, but it makes its money by being. One of the things I always say to people is when people like me come along, we talk about digital transformation or whatever the phraseology that is on vogue for that era, and it changes. We're not necessarily saying, and I very rarely would countenance this, that how you currently make money is wrong. But the way you're doing it might be. I remember seeing a presentation. It was about Wimbledon. All I remember is that first slide, and it had 8 bullet points. First bullet point, I remember the last bullet point. And the first one said, our heritage and tradition are important to us. And I think anyone who watches Wimbledon gets that. Strawberries and cream. Everyone wears white. There's very little advertising visible. The Rolex is discreet, all these things. And the last bullet point, number 8, I think it was, said the fan comes first. And I'm like, would they come 8th? They were at the bottom. And so my point was this, which is, you don't necessarily need to change the words on the page, but you need to change the order. If the fan comes first, how do you bring tradition and heritage to life for them? Right? My other point then is very simple to people. It's like, look, you're trying to sell sponsorship and licensing, but that only works if you have the fan. At the moment, you're trying to sell sponsorship. So you do things like content creation to get numbers to justify your sponsorship numbers. And I've been in-house at some of these places. This is literally what we're doing. And we're creating some really cool content, and we're building data products that are much better. All these things are starting to okay, we're building some very cool tools. But the sponsorship or the licensing or the TV deal comes first. The fan comes later. And my point is, but the sponsor wants the fan. Now, on the B2B, they want the fan who's going to be their future client. And on the B2C, it's because they're actually selling something to them directly. But they typically want the fan. They're coming to you, the club, the IP, the rights holder, because they tried to get to the fan. But you've lowered the fan down to 8 from the list, whilst telling everybody the fan comes first. It's all about the fan. And so to me, the only thing I'd say that is holistic is if you put the fan first and now rethink what does sponsorship look like if the fan comes first, I actually think you'll find a whole bunch of sponsors and partners who go, well, that's very interesting to us because, we want them to love us. The whole point of coming via sport is because you have a relationship with them and they love you through thick and thin. Everton fans might be vitriolic right now, but they still love the club, right? So what they don't want, sponsor doesn't want to be tarnished by it. They want to be seen as, no, we stand by you, the fan, through thick and thin. That to me is how you need to look at it, goes through a different thing. I then go and say, well, in order to connect with the fan, how to build a relationship with the fan in a modern era, well, that requires technology, right? Because the fan isn't just living there. I mean, I grew up on the beach in Rio, a Flamengo fan. I haven't been back to Rio since 2014. It's been a decade. I'm no less a fan, right? I probably actually watch more content about them now than I did then, right? But they haven't been able to raise a penny from me. But I'm a devotee.
And you know what? Sorry to interrupt, but I mean, I was just thinking, before you were mentioning about, or you were talking about the potential that investors see in the reach and the engagement of global football. And I think that's where they see the opportunity, getting more value from the international fan. And there were a few things that you mentioned there that I think are interesting, First, you can innovate without necessarily forgetting about the legacy of the game, which is what got you here. I think you can do that. But that's a trap because now sponsors, they don't want visibility anymore. They want performance. So that's when you need your more close relationship with the fans. It's not about, oh, look, I'm going to create content because I'm going to get more eyeballs and I'm going to get more fans because of my content. But the sponsor's going to say, fine, where's my ROI on this investment? It's not about visibility anymore. And then an interesting debate that I've been having with a lot of football industry leaders, and I want to get your opinion on this, is the fans versus customer debate. And what I mean by this is you look at football and everybody seems to be talking about we need to convert our fans into customers. But when you go into the other industries around the world, they're actually thinking, how can we turn customers into fans, into people that are actually going to be there no matter what, that are going to be loyal to a fault, that are going to be, even if we get relegated, they're going to still be there. So what's your opinion on that?
Well, I mean, the thing I put out there was the fan flywheel, which I based off an article having read the Amazon flywheel. So my point there is, even if I have a bad experience at Amazon, I go back to them because the next experience is typically good. I'll go, my kids go back to school tomorrow and I'm sure there'll be something we discovered today that we didn't get and that we need for tomorrow. And I'll swipe right and it'll be with me by midnight tonight or first thing in the morning. We'll be safe. That experience is just wonderful, right? Now, buying some pretty boring things on Amazon, but I've become a fan because it just makes my life easy. I would rather start with the problem that sport has, or saying, how do we make fans customers? By the way, fans are happy to be customers, right? We just make it really bloody difficult for them. So if I take that analogy slightly further, so again, if I go on Amazon, I can find what I need pretty quickly. I see thousands of substitutes. I go through, I choose it. It offers me other things similar that I would like. I've previously bought, people like me have bought, right? Very sophisticated. It's all there. I can add, not, boom. When I go to, I remember at FIFA trying to come up with something, and we had this strategy document pitch which said, look, Jaime wants to come to, I mean, it was the 2019 Women's World Cup, so it was Paris, but it was like, Jaime wants to come from Madrid to Paris to watch Spain play in the World Cup. And he has to buy tickets from us. But for you to then buy the train ticket, a plane ticket, a hotel, the shirt, all of it, you have to do separate. And it never made sense to me. I was like, but it doesn't take many integrations to say, actually, we know Jaime, we know he's buying 2 tickets. That appears to be a wife or girlfriend, whatever it may be, but there's a female party coming with him for the ticket. So why don't we offer him a flight from Madrid? Let's offer him a hotel room. Here they are. We'll offer him because, would you like tickets to the Moulin Rouge? Would you like tickets to the Louvre? Can we give you a passport on, the Metropolitan so you can go around the subway system? You've booked tickets to watch Spain play against X. Which shirt would you like, and can we have it delivered to your hotel room? What number do you want printed on it? And the point of that was, in a very seamless environment, you could upsell what they want to buy, right? By the way, at this point, if I'm FIFA, my preferred partner is Visa, right? So, and Visa are happy because they've not done 1 transaction, they've done 6 transactions. FIFA should be happy because they've managed to get affiliate fees from the Louvre, Moulin Rouge, a shoe company, a clothing company, like you name it. They can take their 7 to 10% affiliate. So At the moment, if I go, just to tell my current experience as a Chelsea fan, if I want to go and buy more tickets to a Chelsea game, I go on, I can buy my tickets on one microsite. I come out of the Chelsea site into a microsite. I want to buy a shirt, I got to come back out to the main site, go to another microsite. If I want to find a restaurant local because hospitality is booked out, can't do it via Chelsea. I have to do it somewhere else. We make life for the fans really difficult in an era where they're expecting to swipe right and either have a date tonight because of Tinder or Amazon's delivered for me for my children. Whatever it may be, we want to swipe right and have an easy life. And sport is sat there going, no, that's far too easy. What I'd then say about the way the world works is, again, sport is much bigger than it used to be. Its impact is much bigger than it used to be, and so is its reach. Defining a fan in a singular way is nonsensical. I've given you that thing of me as a Flamengo fan. I'm also a massive Red Sox fan. I haven't been to a game in Boston for 6 or 7 years. But I must have 5 baseball caps that are Red Sox. I wear with pride my world titles, World Series title, T-shirts and stuff. So I am a fan, but I'm a different type of fan to the one I am for Chelsea, who I go to as a season ticket holder. Well, yeah, more people are looking at that. And then I also like Manchester City, not because I'm a Manchester City fan, but I love Pep Guardiola and the style of football they play. I grew up in Brazil. I like to subscribe to my version of the Jogo Bonito. And Pep, to me, is the closest thing to it. I like watching it. I've probably watched more Man City games than Chelsea games than anyone else. No one's tried to find a way of getting me to maybe go watch them, because I'm defined as Chelsea. So there needs to be more sophisticated thinking. But, again, if you think about all those data points of that example I gave you on FIFA and a Women's World Cup game for you, the profile we could build of you and understand of you and then build out other people like you is the monetization opportunity. During the Chelsea process, when I met every fan group, all of them were happy to spend money, even those that basically don't make any money. They love the club. They want to spend money with their club. They will all tell you that they feel ostracized by the club, which is bizarre given the amount of money spent on it. And therefore, whilst each year they buy it, some of them would say to me, we buy the shirt every year, but we refuse to go to the stadium to buy it because that feels like we bought it from Chelsea, not Nike. And I thought that was mind-blowing. They'd rather go into central London or go online to Nike.com to buy it than walk 2 minutes down the road into the shop and buy it from the club. That's crazy. So, the wonderful thing there is, it's quite easy to be negative on where the sports industry is. I just can't get myself there. I can't, as much as I get frustrated at times. There is so much opportunity. There is so much more to be done. And I think the more I see actually funds coming in, and, I'm currently exploring a couple of ways of how do I help deploy more capital into sports. I think it needs it. I firmly believe it needs people who understand sport providing the finance, not just bankers. It's 2 skill sets. What is the appropriate money in the appropriate location? How is it then tackled? I also, by the way, think it's my competitive advantage that I could sit with rights holders and say, I understand your business. I understand your challenges. I understand you need capital. Now I need to deliver returns for my investors and for me, but how do we do it in a way that helps you achieve your goals? And how do we get clever about how we both structure the finance, but structure how you deploy it? The other thing that is happening, and I'm fascinated to hear how people start thinking about this. To me, there are a number of foundational technologies that are transforming our opportunity, which makes how you map all that we just spoke about out and how you finance it really interesting. I think a lot of people get obsessed with AI. I always say don't get obsessed with AI. But if you're not coming up with an idea of what your strategy is, you're already behind. To me, there's a number of foundational technologies that you just need to, as a sports organization, think about. It's cloud, it's data, big data, the internet, which, by the way, we're still at the very beginning of the internet. It's blockchain, it's Internet of Things, it's AR, AI and machine learning, 5G, 6G, whatever the next generation becomes. I think they are starting to all speak to each other in real time. And therefore, I think technological growth in the next 5 to 10 years is going to be astronomically quick compared to what we've seen in the past, which conceptually is quite difficult. I think we're going to overestimate what we can do with AI in the next year or two and completely underestimate where we get to in the next 5 to 10 years, which, by the way, happens with every technology. I think sport has been very slow to understand the true capability of blockchain, not crypto, but blockchain. Similar but different. Definitely, I'm sure there's nobody here with an IoT strategy. And so to me, when blockchain became the thing, what made me nervous was I saw people hiring basically sponsorship sales guys who focused on blockchain. And my point is, no. Hire someone senior who understands smart contracts, blockchain, the underlying tech, and where it's going to be in 5 years. And I think some of the groups that did that have ended up in pretty good place. I think McLaren have been doing some pretty smart stuff in this space, but some of the people they were hiring 4 or 5 years ago were more native to the space and understood it. I mean, I laugh because in 2020, I looked at investing in a Formula One team. And one of the comments from the CEO at the time was, oh, look, we collect 3 billion data points over the weekend. And I said, well, that's really interesting. So what's your AI strategy? This is 2020. He looked at me blankly. I'm like, what's the point of having 3 billion data points if you don't have an AI strategy? Like, I'm not saying you need to have the solution. I'm asking for your strategy. Like, who are you hiring? Who are you talking to? What's the plan? What's the philosophy? How do you get to the point that you have a competitive advantage? Because everyone will end up with AI. And so my point would be, those people in sport are obsessed with AI from a generative AI and creating content perspective. I think we'll see some cool applications. But, you've got the Amazon CEO who said they'd save 4,500 engineer time people or whatever it is by putting in some AI bots. That's fundamentally going to shift how they design code. It will fundamentally shift Amazon's cost base. Well, how they think of new products will change. I read a wonderful book called The Future is Faster Than You Think, and I read it February 2020. And in it, it talked about how AI and big data in cloud would transform medical research into vaccines. And it would take it from 10 years to do a vaccine to 1. Within a year, their philosophy had been proven correct. Because within a month, COVID was shutting everyone down. And they used AI, big data, and cloud between all the different laboratories, and everyone focused on it. And money was the other thing they didn't mention, but money focused. And they went, okay, if AI can tell us that this is coronavirus, 95% of which we understand, the 5% we don't, what are the actual solutions? And it got rid of the 95% that wouldn't work and said, just work on these ones. They're more likely to work than the others. Like, wow, So I think sport will be impacted, but more because I think the fan is going to be heavily impacted.
But that's what I was going to say. At the end of the day, all these tools or these transformative technologies are great. If you don't have a strategy, and that strategy usually, or a good strategy, is driven by fan insights and fan behavior. So that's why it makes sense to put fan in the center.
What I would also say to this is, a lot of people get spooked by AI and technology, and technology changes. They are scary. They are scary, and they should be scary. Like, I'm nervous about what I do. Almost every technological change has led to more jobs after than there were before. The jobs are very different, which is the scary bit. Also, the article saying that AI will get rid of everybody's jobs. It doesn't say that other jobs will appear. What I'd say is, in times of hardship, people look for an escape. If you're a sport, you should be doubling down on we're an escape. Times are hard for you. Spend time with us, right? We get it. We understand it's difficult. It's scary. It's challenging, right? Yeah, I think my father was in tobacco, and he got asked, I think, in the 97 Asian crisis, like, I'm probably misquoting because it's quite a long time ago, but he was asked, was he worried as a tobacco man? And he's like, when times are good, people smoke. When times are bad, people smoke. So, and I think he also said it was about alcohol as well, right? In good times, people celebrate with alcohol. In bad times, they drown their sorrows with alcohol. It's like, well, one of the reasons why sport has been a remarkably resilient industry and why investors like it, because it's uncorrelated to the market, is when times get pretty shitty, People need an escape. What's the escape? Watching football. So make the most of it. And when they want to spend money with you, make it really easy for them. And not in a way that they feel like you're fleecing them. Go back to Hampton Richland. We just made it really easy for them to buy a pint, which is why they came in the first place. They wanted to watch a game of football with their friends and have a pint. We make life way more complicated than it needs.
Right? It's not that complicated, exactly. Anyway, Michael, just a few more questions because I want to be respectful of your time. Just out of curiosity, you've had a very interesting career with a diverse background, in technology investment, about broadcasting, which that's for another conversation. I need to bring you back about talk about broadcasting. But so imagine we're given the task to create a new sport from scratch. So what would be the key elements you would bring in to ensure it's a successful sport in the long term?
It's really, really, really simple. Any good sport has it. It's community. Start with a community. The best recent example, and they've lost their way a bit recently, but the best recent example I saw of a new sport being created that's around that was CrossFit. The CrossFit started with the community and then built a sport. Where they lost their way was, it became unattainable. And, when they got so obsessed with the sport, they forgot about the community. Yeah, if I use the examples, like it used to be that the weights you could use in the workouts, if you got fit enough, any reasonable human being could do the weights that they were talking about. But then as the whole community got fitter, they raised that number and then it became unattainable. So people get disinterested. Well, I kind of get there. So what's the point? But to me, it goes back to if you can build community, genuine community, whatever the sport is, you're good. I would, as we said earlier, I'd much rather start with the community and the fandom and have to build a customer base from there than start with customers who don't really want to be there, but they kind of need.
I'm thinking of an answer I got from Peter Moore about his priorities as CEO, Loop, and he mentioned 4 Cs: community, civic, commercial, and culture. And I asked him which one would you prioritize, and he said community. So
Yeah, and I very much like his answer, right? Without a community, can you have commercial? Right? Without a community, you can't be civic. So yeah, I mean, I think community is number one, and I think if you think about what the guys at Wrexham have done, is they've built a really interesting community, and now they've used a completely different way of touching with that community to build it, and they've done it in two ways. The most important one is they've been authentic, and that authenticity is not hiding what they're doing, right? Yeah, they like Wrexham, yeah, but they're very clear. This is a content play. This is what we're trying to do, and the best way for that story to continue is for the club to continue to evolve. But they started by building genuine connection and community with the local fans. How do you build that out? And then the concentric circles just get bigger and bigger and bigger. Started with community. Now, I think they understood that their real play was a content play, but without the community, the content didn't work.
they're not a content business.
It's just smart.
Yeah, it is. They played their cards right, and the context and the timing. They just did everything smartly, And Michael, one last question, because this I didn't get to ask you last time. And as you know, we launched the rebrand at World Football Summit last year, actually almost a year ago. We believe that the football industry needs to become more professional, as we've discussed today. It needs to embrace innovation, as we've discussed today, and be more sustainable. And when I speak about sustainable, it has 3 pillars. It's the financial pillar, it's the social impact pillar, and the environmental pillar. All of this, we summarized it under the claim: the football we want and the football we need. So if I were to ask you very briefly to define the football we want or the football that you need, how would you do it?
I've just said life is much simpler than we make it. I will go to. I was drafting something for looking at a sports team, and I kind of went to, well, what are your audiences? And I said, you've got to start with the fan, and then you've got to start with the team, whether that's the players, the staff, whatever, and then you go to the partners, right? Because I think if you understand what the fan base is, whatever the sport is, and what they really look for, if you understand and you take care of them, you can't take care of them if you don't then take care of your own internal people. And that could be the athletes, it could be the back office staff, the front office staff, whatever you want to call it. They have to come second. And then you tell the sponsors and broadcasters, now you fit in, right? And alongside that third category is the bankers because the world, we're a proper industry now, so that they're all part of that. And I actually, again, I think the fans, and remember, fans, when you win, love you, and when you lose, they hate you. It's really as simple as that. Anyone who works for you probably thinks you're an idiot because that's the case of every business. But if you take care of, now, I think in a modern world, the financial, social, environmental kind of come as part of that, right? So you can't look after the fans and your own athletes if you're not taking care of your environment, right? I just think that becomes a prerequisite. So I'm never a fan necessarily of specific programs around CSR, DEI, whatever we see. They're all needed, right? To me, I'm a fan of where the organization just starts with, well, that's just an intrinsic requirement, not a subdivision that we go away and think about. No, it's an intrinsic requirement. If we're not diverse and inclusive, how can we be successful? It's just a starting point. If we don't care about our social impact and our people, what is one of the things whenever I'm looking at startups is your organic growth rate and their net promoter score, which effectively to me is kind of the social environmental impact, right? Which is your biggest fans are your audience. And if they don't like you, you won't succeed. The problem sport got itself into is that it believes the fan will never go. Now, I think sport is part of the human DNA, but that doesn't mean you have a divine right to their attention. So yeah, to me, it's fans one, your organization two, the other parties three, and that's the football I want.
Amazing. I like that answer. And I like this conversation, Michael. Always fun.
It's always fun. And I look forward to some people sending me rude notes afterwards and some people saying that was great. And I always love that because the great thing is that's the point, right? Is the debate, the conversation, hearing a difference of opinion, which I know some people don't like that said out loud, but
that's the football we need.
That is absolutely what we need. Divergence of opinion to get to the right result.
There you go. Diversity leads to wisdom, Michael.
Fabulous. Always good to see you.
Anyway, Michael, this has been great. I'll see you in a few weeks for World Football Summit. And I will see you again in this podcast for sure.
Fabulous.
You have an open invitation. You know that. All right?
Thank you, sir.
Michael, have a good day.
You too.
Thank you. And there you have him, Michael Broughton, friend of the show and someone who I always have fun and learn from at the same time. So I really liked the conversations with him on the podcast. Let's try to summarize all that we discussed today because we covered a lot, actually. So we started off talking about investments, and the thing is, as the industry is evolving, football industry is evolving, you see two dynamics going on, which is from a financial perspective, the models are becoming more complex. The sport business model is not so simple anymore. Then when you look at the evolution of the sports property and how they're negotiating the deals, that's not evolving. So you have a mismatch in terms of the talent that's actually looking into investing in sports and the people at the properties. And this is not a critic. It's just it's what's happening. At the end of the day, as he said, the advice: retain good advisors. Get a good CFO. And so you really have to ask yourself, when you get these investments coming in, which they're not bad, they're not necessarily bad. It's just a matter of understanding where your business is going, where your football business is going, So what sense does it make to sell your future if you're not thinking about how you're going to evolve your business model? That's the risk. That's what you really need to think about. And then we transitioned into talking about fans, and really what does this actually mean to put the fan in the center? Because as he said, what investors really like about football is their potential in terms of reach, in terms of engagement, in terms of monetization. But that means actually putting the fans in the center and reducing friction along the fan journey. There's no one model, and you can evolve the model. But again, as we've talked with other leaders in the past, don't forget about the legacy of the game. You can innovate, but you can always remember what got you here. And that's what fans want, you know? And there's so many opportunities. I like the way he framed it, which is you can, you don't need to change the words on the page, just change the order, you know? And so I like that example. And then we shifted in talking about the power of transformative technologies. And he mentioned a few of them, he mentioned big data, cloud, he mentioned blockchain, AR, artificial intelligence, of course, 5G, Internet of Things. This is all great, but at the core, you need to be thinking about your business strategy. That's the key. If you don't, and what guides the business strategy in a football property? Fan insights. So again, it all starts with the fan. Understand your fan, understand where you want to add value, how you can capture value from them, develop your strategy, and then bring in the tools and the technologies. Finally, we were talking about, and I really like this answer, how community has to be the pillar of the sport business model. Because without community, you don't have anything else. You don't have commercial model. You probably don't have a culture that you can develop. You cannot be civic, and this is going back to the 4 C's framework we saw with Peter Moore. So, and how can you be authentic to your community? Again, think about the 3 pillars he mentioned at the end when he was talking about the football he wants and he needs. The fan comes first, because that is going to help you understand their values. Then your team, and that team is going to help you develop the culture around those values, which come from the fans. And then you bring in the partners. Then you're able to identify who's it for and who's it not for in terms of partnerships. It's got to be much easier. Anyway, guys, those are my main takeaways. This was really fun again. I want to thank Michael, and I look forward to seeing him in World Football Summit. Even if this gets published afterwards, I'm sure we saw each other and we had a lot of fun. If there's anything else that stood out to you, please feel free to reach out on social media. Share, subscribe to the podcast. You will not believe how that helps us bring elite guests like Michael to the show. And also subscribe to our newsletter, where every week we're going to send, we're sharing just trends, updates about our events, and everything that goes on at the World Football Summit community, actually. And nothing else. I want to wish you a great rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you next time.